Hi guys, welcome to my very first book club video. I know a lot of you joined along with me. We read Tom Hanks' Uncommon Type, which is his collection of short stories. I talked about when I announced this would be the first book that we were doing that I just love Tom Hanks. I was so excited to see what he could do as a writer, because obviously we already know he's an incredible actor. And I'm so glad I chose this, and I think you guys were too, because like I said, I got a lot of messages. I know a lot of you loved it, and I can't wait to read your comments down below. I did get a few people who were like, I'm not really into short stories, which is interesting because I was going to say kind of a stigma against short stories. I feel like you almost have to be famous to get a book of short stories published. Like there's just not as big of a market for it maybe. So that was interesting to me that a few of you were not down for that, but I totally understand. But I love short stories. I think they're just like these little delicious little bites of, I don't know, a little novel in a bite-sized piece, I guess. And so this collection did not disappoint. I loved all the stories. I'm actually gonna just go through them each one really quickly. I'll try to avoid spoilers, but I think most of you read it with me, so hopefully, yeah, there's a couple of things we got to talk about, so but for the most part I will try to avoid spoilers. Oh, and before I dive in, I want to remember to say happy birthday to Kathy. When I mentioned that this would be the book we were doing on this day, she said today is her birthday, so happy birthday to you. And to everybody who did join me and read along, thank you so much, and let's just flip through it together. Overall, I have to say that I just adored it. I read it twice, the first time in print and the second time on audiobook, which I highly recommend because it's read by Tom Hanks himself, and it's just hearing his voice took this to the next level. But I did kind of want to try to separate my love for him as an actor from the book and just sort of judge it as a standalone thing, as if he were just any other writer I didn't know of. Because I just feel like that's fair, but even, you know, taking it apart from who he is and how fantastic his movies are and everything, I did really love it as a book. And then once I read the audiobook in his voice, I was like, okay, now I really, really love it. So highly recommend doing that if you haven't already checked it out on Audible. It's just a really good audiobook. He also has some other actors in it. I'll get to those when we get to those stories, but so much fun. I will say it was actually one of the most suspenseful books I've read in a long time, and anybody who's read it knows that that's a really weird statement, but I was so scared that every story was going to end horribly. Did you guys have that at all? Like, I just felt like, especially with short stories, I think there's kind of a thing out there where they almost always have to end horribly or tragically or meaninglessly, and that's kind of like the thing with short stories. I feel like that's considered more artistic. Whereas a short story with like a happy ending, there's like a little bit of a stigma. That's just my perception, like being kind of in the literary world, having gotten a degree in English and writing, and I don't know, do you guys agree with that? I feel like there's kind of a thing where a short story has to have some kind of like dramatic or meaningless ending to seem like edgy. I don't know. So every single one of these stories, I was so scared that they would end horribly. I'm so curious to hear if you guys felt the same way, but there was just a lot of suspense for me, and I think he was like playing with that and purposefully building up the suspense in most of these. But overall, I am a fan of happy endings, I have to admit. I feel like if I'm going to dedicate my time to watch a movie or read something, I want to kind of choose the emotion that I'm going to get out of that. So I do like a happy ending. I love a good romance. I love that satisfaction. So I was relieved that most of these stories did not disappoint, and they weren't like artsy short stories. They were really good, satisfying, emotionally fulfilling, funny. I just love them all. Okay, let's just go through them all quickly. So the first one, 3 Exhausting Weeks. By the way, each of these stories had a typewriter in it. Did you guys find all of the typewriters as you were going? Sometimes it was like a really subtle mention. Like this one, I think he was playing a trivia game on his phone, and one of the questions was about a typewriter. Some of them were really subtle, and then some of them it was like the typewriter was like the main character. So I thought that was kind of a fun thing that I like when short story collections have something that weave them all together. So I really enjoyed that. Plus, sorry, my phone just went off. So I really enjoyed that. Plus, obviously I'm kind of a typewriter fanatic myself. I put my typewriters front and center for this video. This one is unfortunately what Tom Hanks would call a plastic hunk of junk. I got it at Michael's, and it's not authentic in any way, but it's beautiful and it's pink and it actually works. Whereas all of my more vintage typewriters that I've collected over the years, it's an investment to get them up and running. So anyway, that was a whole side note. I have a typewriter tattoo. Anyway, okay. I love that aspect. This first story was one of my favorites. It's a romance, actually. It starts out with like some sexy scenes too. Like nothing, not like 50 Shades, but I was like, whoa. Tom Hanks is like America's dad, but it was a really fun story to start off with. I felt like the characters felt so real. The girlfriend in this story, Anna, is so annoying. Actually, I have to say, almost all of the women in this book I found to be a bit annoying, which was interesting. Like, they're obviously well-developed characters if I had that kind of reaction to them. But that said, I liked Anna and I related to her, but she was supposed to be annoying. Like, she's one of those people who's like always on the go. And so I definitely saw some of myself in her character. The good thing is that Nate kind of balances me out more than the narrator in this story was just kind of rolling with it. And so it imploded. But yeah, I don't know. I thought that was really interesting. I really enjoyed the characters in this. They were so unique, but real feeling. The next one was called Christmas Eve, 1953. I loved this story so much. This was probably my second favorite in the whole book. It was just so beautiful and lovely, so scary and suspenseful because I thought something horrible was going to happen to this really sweet family on Christmas Eve. I love the 1950s, and it was just such a vivid picture of Christmas Eve night in 1953, and I just felt totally transported, which I adore that. So I loved that so much, but I was just so scared something really traumatic was going to happen. There's all these references to heat. I don't know if you guys caught that. Like, I'm sure you did. It was pretty prevalent in the story, but like he kept cranking the heater hotter, and like the kid is building the fire in the house, and I was like, oh my God, something horrible is gonna happen. Like this house is gonna burn down. I don't know, and it was just stressing me out. Finally, it comes to be revealed that the trauma has taken place in the past, and we're in this like sort of peaceful, sweet present. So I just really enjoyed that. It was such a relief that nothing bad happened on Christmas Eve, 1953. And it was just one of my favorite stories. I came back to that one several times because it was just, it painted such a strong night. And then it also touched on a theme that I think is kind of common, something that Tom Hanks is sort of fascinated with maybe, which is war. So I'm still skirting, trying not to give you guys any spoilers, but definitely check that story out because it goes from the most sweet, idyllic little silent night on Christmas Eve to flashbacks that are so traumatic, and I felt like I was in the trenches. Like I was really transported, which I just thought was amazing that Hanks was able to write it so vividly, and then also just to juxtapose such different emotional states in the same story. So I loved that one. I loved it. Okay, the next one is A Junket in the City of Light, and this one felt like it was definitely based on personal experience. It's about honestly how horrible it is to be on a press tour for a movie, and I thought it was just such a fun read and also so educational. It felt very true that press tours probably are that whirlwind, honestly quite unenjoyable. You think it sounds so glamorous to be like touring Europe with your movie release, but the picture that this painted was just hellish, and I thought it was so much fun because it was written with such like levity. The narrator was fantastic, and it just definitely felt like something that perhaps the author knew something about. And I just loved it. It was so interesting. One of the funniest parts to me was how the press kept asking him the same questions, which was about, I was picturing like Angelina Jolie as his co-star. He's Willa Sachs is the name of the actress character, and she's like the actress that everybody's obsessed with, maybe like a Julia Roberts type. But I was so amused that everybody wanted to ask him, what's it like kissing her, and was that really your butt in the movie? So I was like, that's sad to think that probably so many actors that really is all they get to answer sometimes. So very entertaining to say the least. The next story was a recurring section, which is these newspaper columns called Our Town Today with Hank Fizit. And I at first was kind of annoyed by this. It was like such a jarring change from the narrative of like the short stories. And all of a sudden we were reading this little, it's like a small town newspaper column with honestly kind of an obnoxious writer character. In fact, I'm gonna play a little bit of the audiobook of Tom Hanks reading it.
Hey, An elephant in the press room. So many rumors here at the paper. The bull elephant in the room says the Tri-Cities Daily News.
Anyway, he puts on a bit of a voice that I think it's, you know, it's supposed to be a little bit annoying, but as it turns out to be a recurring piece throughout the book, I fell in love with it. I just would look forward to these so much. And I wish this was like an actual newspaper column I could tune into. It was just sort of endearing. It's got this small town charm to it. Yeah, I wound up loving it. So there you go. Okay, the next story was Welcome to Mars. This was another one that was so stressful. Also, it doesn't have a happy ending. So I don't know if I said earlier that they all have happy endings. I just meant overall that I'm glad there aren't all tragic endings. This one, though, was very sad, and it was so stressful getting there because it's about a surf trip and there's like a lot of family tension. I actually had the absolute honor of going to a reading that Tom Hanks did when this book first came out, and he talked about the fact that some of it is a bit autobiographical. His parents actually got divorced at a time when that wasn't as common as it is today. So a big theme throughout this book is divorce, which is interesting because his marriage is one of like the strongholds in Hollywood. But this one had a theme of divorce, and there's a lot of family tension, and it's between a father and a son going on a surf trip. And I was so like, I mean, I thought they were gonna get eaten by sharks or something. Like, I was so stressed out. And then finally this physical trauma does happen, and part of me was like, okay, like, we're past it. But then it turns out that the emotional trauma in the story goes far deeper than the actual physical thing I was worried about. So without saying too much, this story just had a lot of layers, a lot of depth. Emotionally, it was tough, but it's a coming of age story too. I feel like it's a very pivotal moment in this young man's life, and I appreciated it. It wasn't the kind of ending that felt like it was just trying to be manipulative or artsy or anything like that. It felt very genuine and real and raw, and so I love this story. It wasn't one that I would want to come back to because I was like, it was like Christmas 1953, like, yes, but it was still just so powerful. All right, so the next one was A Month on Green Street. This is, again, a story with a female protagonist that I didn't love. I found her a little annoying for some reason. I don't know why, but I loved the story. I loved her kids in the story. I loved the reluctant romance in the story. It was so great. And one of my favorite details in the whole book actually happens in this story when she's talking about how she has almost a clairvoyance where she gets these little pops of seeing a moment of her future. And I just thought that was so distinct that she calls it a pop. And there were some examples of like Pop seeing like the sex of her child before her child was born, or like Pop like seeing her husband before they got married, this house that they wind up moving into. I just loved that concept. I thought that was so unique that she's like essentially clairvoyant, but not taking any credit for it. And it's just a really unique character trait. So I loved that story too. The next one was Alan Bean +4, and this was such a fun surprise. I think I like squealed in delight because the characters from the first story came back in this one. I was so happy to see them again, and it was a little bit shocking because they went to the moon. So the first story I read as if it were present day. It definitely didn't feel sci-fi in any way. So it was just so interesting to see them suddenly doing this sci-fi level feat of actually going to space. And this had another one of my favorite images in the whole book, which is when they see the Earth from space and they cry and their tears float off because there's no gravity and their tears are like intermingling. I just thought that was so beautiful. And I love space too. I know that's another popular theme for Mr. Hanks, and I would go to space in a heartbeat. So I just loved this story. I thought it was so fun, so different. I loved that it was the same characters in a different way. Oh, I highlighted the line, "Tears popped off my face and joined the others' tears, which were floating around the Alan Bean." Anyway, it was so good. Okay. Next story was another Hank Fissett article, and this one was about New York City, the Big Apple, and it was just so cute, all of the terms that he used in describing New York City, and I just thoroughly enjoyed it. I love New York. I think that might be another one of Tom Hanks's things too. We have a lot in common. I love New York. I love The Big Apple, as Hank Physick calls it in that article, was so fun. And then it was a nice prelude because the next story, called Who's Who, is set in New York in the 70s and has a female protagonist that, again, I didn't totally love, but I felt like she felt very real, and she's just trying to make it in New York. And it was so fun and so interesting. It really sucked me in. One of the most fun scenes is that she winds up taking a bath in her friend's kitchen, and it's just like, what woman doesn't want a fabulous gay man to draw her a bath and then leave her alone for hours to just soak and enjoy it? It was just such a, I just felt like something that any girl would actually want. So I thought that was a really fun story. The next one was A Special Weekend, and this is another one that deals with divorce. It's about a child of parents who are divorced, and I just love the way he depicts the child in this. The protagonist felt so authentic. Like, sometimes kids come across as too precocious, I feel like, in movies and books, but this just felt like a real kid who was kind of really dealt a tough hand in that his parents weren't meant to be together. And it was such a fascinating little snapshot of his life in this one special weekend with his mom. And the mom character was very intriguing to me because she was a bit more selfish than we think of moms being. And she was also a woman, like a real woman, not just a mom. Like, moms kind of get separated from their femininity sometimes. So it was just, the whole story is a very interesting dynamic. The next one, These Are the Meditations of My Heart, another one that I just loved. So good. It's all about a girl acquiring a typewriter, and the interactions she has, like the people she meets, feel so real. The dialogue's so good, and it's so poetic and beautiful. And it's, as a girl that loves typewriters, it was meant for me. I felt like, in fact, my first typewriter that I ever got was like from a garage sale. It barely worked, and it had, somebody had typed on it and stuck to it the phrase, "hit that key." And I think they meant, because this is a piece of junk and you gotta like pound the keys to make it work. But it kind of became, like, in college, my little motto to myself, like, yeah, hit that key. It's so cheesy, you guys. But that was, I loved that. And so this typewriter that she acquires has, These Are the Meditations of My Heart. And it helps her to open up her own heart and start to journal and go to this deeper plane of existence, all just from acquiring a typewriter. So loved that one. But this one was my absolute favorite in the whole book. It's called The Past Is Important to Us. It was so beautiful. That said, this is not one of the ones with a happy ending. It had a very, very, very traumatic ending that I couldn't stop thinking about. And frankly, I was really mad at Tom Hanks for a while. Like, we were in a fight. He didn't know it, but for a good week, I was just mad because it ended so traumatically. But it was just a really lovely story. It's another one that has the charm of another era because it's set, somebody in the future is time traveling to the World Fair of 1939. And like I said, I'm obsessed with bygone eras, so I just loved this concept of time travel, but it wasn't cheesy time travel. It wasn't like weird sci-fi time travel. It felt truly authentic, and it followed its own rules. Like, I hate when movies or books break the rules, and all of a sudden they're time traveling in ways that they couldn't before. It was very specific, like how time travel works, what he could do during the time travel and what he couldn't do. And I just loved the vivid portrait of the World Fair in 1939. Like, what a cool moment. And there was a romance, and I loved it, and I was rooting for it. That was actually one of the female characters in this book that I loved just wholeheartedly. She didn't annoy me on any level. And I was just really rooting for it, and I kind of got seduced by it, but it ends very, very horribly, and I was upset. But finally, I came to realize it's a cautionary tale. The main character is married numerous times, and it's just like a recurring theme with him, and he wants to like have an affair with this girl, and obviously that wouldn't be right. So I shouldn't have really been rooting for the romance, but I was, because it just was so sweet. And so it ended the way it had to end, because I think it was like a cautionary tale, and he was trying to be a bad boy. So I don't know. I came around. I'm no longer mad at how it ended. I think it ended perfectly, actually, but it was just, it was a lot to go through. The next one is Stay With Us, and this is really fun because it's a screenplay format. which I have to assume, being an actor for so many years, you read a lot of screenplays and you probably get a hankering to write some. But I was struggling to get into it in the book format, but on the audiobook, I loved it. It's just, screenplays are meant to be heard and performed anyway. And he brought in some other actors for this, and it was just so fun. I really enjoyed it, even though it was totally not a story I would have gravitated toward normally. Then there was Go See Costas, and this one was so moving, and it touched on something that really pulls at my heartstrings, which was about immigrants coming to America. They're, especially in the beginning, the lengths that they go to get here is just so sad and so moving and so inspiring. It's like that the poem on the base of the Statue of Liberty is about, you know, welcoming immigrants to America, and I cry every time I think about that. I just think it's so beautiful, and this story just hit me right in that same spot. And it was so sweet how they supported each other coming here. And then the two main characters get split up in America, but we follow the one, and he's just so tenacious and just does whatever he can to make it here. And it was just absolutely inspiring, really powerful, really moving. I loved it so much. And again, the characters were so authentic. I mean, totally just got lost in that story. Then the last story brought us back to the first characters from the very beginning, which I thought was perfect to bookend it that way. And this one focused on their friend Steve Wong and his unlikely bowling career. So honestly, it kind of ended on like a silly note. But also, of course, as with every story, there were layers of meaning, and I really enjoyed it, especially because I was once a bowler on my JV bowling team. But I thought it was really fun because bowling was no longer fun for this guy once it became all the pressure of like perfection. So it's just a life lesson for all of us. And that was it. So thank you, Tom Hanks, for a fantastic read. I really, really loved this. I can't wait to hear what you guys think. Please comment below your thoughts on the book if you read it. And just some housekeeping for next time. I think we should read Girl, Wash Your Face. It's by Rachel Hollis. Have you heard about it? It's been like recommended to me by probably 5 different friends now. Sadly, I don't think it's about washing your face at all. I don't think there's any skincare in here. Huge disappointment, I know. But it is supposed to be very empowering, and I wanted to read something that was more of like a personal development type book. We will do a novel next, you guys, I promise, because I know a lot of you were like, I don't know about short stories, but seriously, give this a shot. And this one's more of like a self-helpy type nature. So the next one will be a novel. Tell me what novel you want me to pick. I'm totally open to your suggestions. But since this one was recommended so much, and I think it's gonna be really empowering and really fun to read, so let's read this together next. And we can talk about it on September 7th, because I like to give us plenty of time. We have a lot of other stuff we cover on this channel, so, you know, we'll fit it in when we can. September 7th. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for reading with me. I hope you had as much fun as I did with that one. Please hit subscribe so you don't miss any future book clubs or any other videos in the midst. And I'll talk to you in the comments down below. Thanks, guys. Bye.